So today we're going to be looking at add-in and subtracting functions. So if you look in this table, okay, so we're going to be looking at addition and subtraction. So one thing just to note is f plus g of x is the same thing as f of x plus g of x. So these really are the same thing, or if you have f minus g of x equals f of x minus g of x. So there's two ways to write these um, when you see a problem. So if you see something that looks like this, oops, or you see something that looks like this, they're really the same thing. So just pay attention, but I mean, basically you'll be adding the functions together or subtracting the functions. Our first set of problems we're going to look at are with like numbers. So we're going to kind of evaluate them like we did earlier this week. We're not going to, and sorry, this table, we're not doing the product or the quotient yet, but eventually we will. So let's just get into some examples. Let's start looking at some of these. So they give us four different functions. So just pay attention. We have our f of x equals 2x minus 3, g of x equals x squared minus 1, h of x equals x plus 2, and s of x equals 3. So we have these four different functions. So we want to be careful and pay attention to which function they're asking us to use. So this first problem, just like I said, remember f plus g of 2 is really what they're telling you. This is f of 2 plus g of 2. So when you're adding or subtracting with like numbers where you're evaluating your functions, my advice is just to work them out on the side. So like f of 2, you'd be plugging it into the f function. So that would be 2 parentheses 2 minus 3. And then our g of 2, we would plug into the g function. So that would be 2 squared minus 1. So if we work these out, f of 2, 2 times 2 minus 3 is 1. So this is really 1. So 1 plus. Then if we work out our g function, 2 squared minus 1 is 3. I highly encourage, if you don't have like one of those nice like TI calculators, where like one of those calculators, I would recommend you use Desmos calculator versus your phone, because especially if you're not careful with your parentheses, and sometimes on your phone it's not always the best. You can get these wrong if you're not careful. So I would take the time to open up like Desmos calculator so you can type them in, just to make sure you're not missing any questions that you shouldn't. But that's the idea with these. So like I said, basically you want to just figure out each part individually and then either add or subtract your answers based on what they're telling you to do. Let's look at another one really quick though, and maybe I'll have you try one or two. So for B, let me just zoom out a little bit so we can see it. So remember, this is really f of negative 3 minus g of negative 3. So we're just going to figure out what those two pieces are. And honestly, when you're working these out, you know, like, I mean, most of the work we've been doing is in Delta Math and stuff anyways, but like, I don't need to see your work. I'm just writing it out here so you can see how I'm getting it. But I mean, if you're plugging it in your calculator, you really don't need to write this out. But f of negative 3 would be 2 parentheses negative 3 minus 3. And then g of negative 3 would be negative 3 squared minus 1. If you work this out, 2 times negative 3 minus 3 would be negative 9. Then if you work out your g, negative 3 squared minus 1 would be positive 8. Like I said, make sure you put those parentheses or you'll probably get the wrong answer. So then negative 9 minus 8 would be negative 17. So that's the idea with these. If you watch the Ed Puzzle assignment I posted yesterday, it's going over this. So if you haven't had a chance, it's just a 2-minute video. I'm going to do one more, just so we see that there's different functions. So let's look at this third one, then maybe I'll have you try the last three. So C, you have h of 3 plus s of o, or it's not s of o, s of 0. So h of 3, if I can squeeze it in, that's this function here. So that would just be 3 plus 2. And then s of 0, that's this function here. So that would just be 3 times 0. So I mean, if you work these out, h of 3, 3 plus 2 is 5. And then, I mean, 3 times 0 is just 0. So this would be 5. But I'm going to give you a little bit of time if you want to try D, E, and F. Just make sure you're looking at the functions up here on the top.
What is that?
So for D, you would have plugged in, let me just erase this. You would have plugged -2 into the G function, which we haven't. No, we didn't do that yet. I was going to say if we did it, we could just copy what we got before. So, I mean, this is like what you would put in your calculator, -2 squared minus 1. And I'll just work that out. If you do work it out, you should get 3. And then we're going to do h of 5. So that's this function here. So that would be 5 plus 2, or just 7. So since we're adding these together, I mean, we would just take our answers, 3 plus 7, and we would get 10. So, I mean, basically, like with these ones where you're evaluating, you want to just do them separately. And then with your answers, you're either going to add or subtract them based on what the question's asking. So let's look at these last two. So like for this one, h of 1, you'd plug it into here. So that would be 1 plus 2, or that equals 3. And then f of 3, that's this function here. So and we didn't do it yet. So 2 times 3 minus 3, that would also be 3. So if you subtract these from each other, you would just have 3 minus 3, or 0. And then our last one, same idea, f of 0, you're going to plug it into this first function. So 2 times 0 minus 3 would be -3. If you like plug that in. F of 3 we just did, actually over here. So, I mean, I already know that answer is just 3. I mean, you could plug it in again, but -3 plus 3 would also be 0. So, I mean, if you're working these out and you got the same answer twice, you thought you were wrong. Nope, you're right. So that's like kind of like when you're adding or subtracting. These are like what it looks like when you're evaluating with a number. So this is kind of like the first big kind of idea when you're adding or subtracting functions. So if you're evaluating with variables, I mean, you'll notice the functions, they're exactly the same, but it's f plus g of x. So remember, this is f of x plus g of x. So basically, we're just going to add our equations here. I'm going to color code this. So I'll make g of x in red. So if you're adding, you really like adding's not, you don't have to be too careful. We'll see when we subtract. There's one thing we got to be careful when we're subtracting, but f of x is 2x minus 3. And then g of x is x squared minus 1. So we want to add these two like expressions together. So we got to combine our like terms. Just one thing to be aware of, like when you combine your x parts, you can only combine them if they have the same power. So like, for example, x squared and 2x, you can't combine those together because they don't have the same power. They're actually not like terms. So like if we were going to like combine our like terms, I mean, the x squared just comes down. There's nothing to combine it with. The 2x just comes down. There's nothing to combine it with. But we can combine our constants, like a -3 and a -1 would be a -4. So this would be our answer. So if you're evaluating with like an x, like not a number, you're going to get an answer with like x's in it. So you'll see like all the answers like on this section we're about to do here, like we're all going to get x's in our answers. let's look at B. And B, I'm going to put an asterisk by question B because this one's kind of like, if you're going to miss a question with these, I think it's a question like B. So we're using the same function. So I'm going to use the same color code. So remember, this is really f of x minus g of x. So f of x is 2x minus 3. And then minus, here's where you got to be careful. When you subtract, you can put it in parentheses if you want, but basically when you subtract, you got to distribute this minus sign. So like this wouldn't be 2x minus, this would be 2x minus 3 minus x squared, and then minus a minus would turn into a plus 1. Basically, when you subtract, you want to switch your signs, like of your second part, like of the part you're subtracting. So then if we combine our like terms, like the x squared would come down, the 2x would come down, and then we could combine our minus 3 and our plus 1. So minus 3 plus 1 would be minus 2. But if you're subtracting, you gotta basically change the signs of like everything you're subtracting, if that makes sense. So if it's either, just remember, like if you're subtracting this and this, just remember this is gonna turn into a minus, this is gonna turn into a plus. So if you want to just write it with the different signs, that's fine. But it's because when you subtract this quantity, like you're really subtracting an x squared and subtracting a minus 1. When you subtract a minus 1, it really turns into a plus 1. Like minus -1 is really the same thing as plus 1. So you got to be careful if you're subtracting with variables. That's my advice. But feel free, if anyone does have a question, you can put it in the chat or just let me know. But like I said, I think B is a tricky one. Let's look at a few more. So for example, this one's h of x. So h of x is x plus 2 minus s of x. So like I said, when you're going to switch the sign of this, or it's going to turn into a minus 3x. Like it's not going to be plus 3x. But this one's a little bit different since it's just one term. I mean, it really just is minus 3x. So if it's one term, it's really not that bad. But if you combine your like terms, you could combine your x's, like 1x minus 3x would be negative 2x, and then the plus 2 just comes down. Here, I'm going to try and I'm just going to try and move that up a little bit out of the way. Okay. So g of x plus h of x, so that would just be x squared minus 1, that's g of x, plus h of x is x plus 2. So we're adding these two together. So if we do that, I mean, the x squared just comes down. There's no other x squareds to combine with. The x would just come down because there's no x's to combine it with, but our constants, we can do minus 1 plus 2 would be plus 1. So our final two questions will be E and F, like F plus H of X, S of X minus F of X. Just remember for E here, remember that is F of X plus H of X, like that's the same thing. So see if you can try these last two questions, then we'll kind of call it a day in here. Let me resume. So for E, like if you're adding, it's not too bad. I mean, you're just going to write them like, so F of X is 2x minus 3. So plus, and then our H of X is x plus 2. The only thing, like after you do this, you want to combine your like terms. So we can combine our x's here. So 2x plus x, remember that's 1x. We don't usually write the 1, but that would be 3x. Oops. And then we also can combine our constants. So minus 3 plus 2 would be minus 1. So like your answer would be 3x minus 1 for E. For F, this is one of those subtraction ones. Like F is is honestly a tough question. So you would have S of x is 3x minus f of x. When you subtract, you want to change the signs. So it's up to you because it's minus this. So if you want to just write it or just put it in parentheses first, but like when you subtract this, it's going to be 3x minus 2x plus 3. So I don't know if it's easier to write it like this and distribute, or just remember when you subtract, you got to switch your signs, like of both parts. So, but once you do that, 3x minus 2x would be 1x, and then the plus 3 would just come down.